Good evening. Welcome. We'll call the Program and Personnel Committee meeting to order for October 10th, 2022. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. We got a flag right over here. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I'll just run down the agenda real quick here. We'll have an invitation for public comment, and then we have calendar proposals we're going to look at, board policy for second reading, which was discussed previously, review of board policies, section 6, I think is what we're looking at tonight. We have some educational tours to discuss, the results of our board governance handbook work, and the discussion of the joint annual conference, and then an opportunity for future agenda items discussion, and then we will adjourn. Everyone okay with that agenda? And I'm actually on the right one this time. Last, it's confusing when they're backwards on the thing. Okay, so invitation for public comment. Do we have anyone that would like to speak to the board? No, going once, twice. Mary, anybody from?
None.
None? Okay, well, that's good. Makes it easy that way. Calendar proposals, our first agenda item here.
Good afternoon. Yes. So you have the 23-24 and the 24-25 calendar proposals. What we've done is we've added 2 new staff orientation days right before the teacher institutes, as well as moved the first day of school to a Monday. Also pushing it back a little bit so that we have better alignment with the elementary districts. We also moved the September Institute Day to February so that we have one in October and one in February. And the teacher grading day would be the May 22nd on the 24-25 calendar and on May 24th on the 23-24 calendar.
Okay. I'm looking at 2 different calendars here. 24-25. And these are both alternate versions that we have. Okay, I got them both.
No, the alternate version is just ADA compliant version that you see. So it's
It's just listed.
just listing, whereas the other one is
Okay.
table format.
I appreciate the responsiveness to the community feedback that we received, asking if we could push the first day a little bit later. And it looks like you took the opportunity to make some important and meaningful changes and use that to accommodate that request as well. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
And also thanks to our colleague Casey. I know you still participate
Mm-hmm.
on the calendar committee.
How many years has that been now? Way too many.
I actually talked to my daughter about this 13.
13. Yeah. That's a lot. That's good. Well, some consistency there. Any comments or questions?
I was just going to say again, thank you for taking the feedback for the feeder schools. I think we heard that many times. My only other question, which I'm sure you've considered, is we had some students talk about the holidays. There was some mix up this year, and I think there was a date identified in April, and I'm assuming you.
We're
Got
working
that.
on that. Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
Are you talking about the day for Eid?
Yeah, we've gotten some mixed messages. I reached out to the Islamic Foundation and spoke to someone there who gave me a date. And Brian reached out to a former student and we got a little bit of a different feedback. So I think we might have to just get a handful of folks together and just come to like a consensus on, as a district, this is the day that we will observe Eid on, whether it's the first day or the second day, and just stick with that moving forward.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Any other comments? Thank you for the work on this.
So we'll be voting on this at the board meeting.
Next on the agenda, we have a board policy for second reading. This is the one regarding the fund balances. We discussed this last month. Any,
And there were no changes
No
from
changes,
last
no.
month from the first reading.
any further discussion needed on this one? This will come to the board and at the next meeting for a second reading and then adoption. Okay, it's another easy one down. Review of board policy. So we're going to discuss briefly section 6. Brian, do you have any overview comment?
But what I did was I included section 6, which is instruction, but any of the policies in section 6 that we had updated within the last year. So I took those out because we just reviewed them recently, so I didn't think that we needed to, review them again. So again, section 6 really focuses first on, the educational philosophies, objectives for the district, looks at the organization of instruction, looks at how the curriculum is developed. Some of the other things that just kind of want to highlight too. Get to the right section here. Got to get used to everything online here on board docs. It does also cover some of the things in like 6150 home and hospital instruction. And so, that's just something to highlight that, there are situations where students, because of a medical condition, may not be able to come into schools, but we do also work with our counselors, social workers, and if the students in special education, and work on home and hospital instruction with them. So just want to highlight some of that. Also, next thing, in section 6190, I want to highlight extracurricular and co-curricular activities, and it is in instruction section because it is also tied in, I think, with our curriculum, and it's an extension of the classroom. So I think that's important just to highlight that piece is also in our board policies, that extracurriculars are really, I think, an instruction and part of our curriculum. Some of the other things, 6210 addresses instructional materials. And I know we are also, looking at all of those and doing an equity audit and looking at that. And I think that's important to highlight that board policy governs our instructional materials, but then I think there are, the administration always takes a look at the materials that we have and make sure that they are following board policy 6210. One of the other ones in here that comes up quite a bit, 6240 addresses field trips and educational tours. And that's, Yesenia brings educational tours to the board for approval, and that's covered in board policy 6240. And that's why they come to the board meetings for approval. So those are some of the highlights that I wanted to, and I know we're on, again, a 2-year cycle. So the last time that we addressed this was the fall of 2020. And I think now we're starting to cycle things maybe for the second time. So, so for board members that have been around now, so that's just kind of, I think, a good education of our board policies. Were there any questions on anything?
Is it okay to start kind of chipping away at the details a little bit?
Mhm.
Okay.
As long as you speak into the microphone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this old thing.
Okay, so you know what, I noted by page number today instead of by policy
Sure.
number, so I apologize, but
that works.
page 3, just when we talk about equity, inclusivity, I apologize if we're about to open a long discussion, but let me just get to the verbiage real quick. Sorry, scrolling.
So you're on policy 640, curriculum
it's-
development.
It's under instruction. So, single gender classes and activities. So just was looking at the language there, and it specifies both genders must be treated with substantial equity. And I don't find that particularly problematic. I just don't know if it's inclusive enough, given the ever changing and progressing words we could use to maybe capture all students. So
Mhm.
I don't know
do you
if
think
there's
any gender.
all genders, any gender. I suggestions welcome. But I figured it could use a little expansion in terms of who it included. So maybe a note there.
Yeah, I'll note that, and I'll look at any of the board press policy updates.
Sure.
If they don't have anything in there, I can also reach out to them too. See when the last time they reviewed this then.
Okay. And then on page 10, we have policy 6130, program for the gifted. I just had some questions on this because I am not terribly aware of a gifted program. I'm aware of AP placement and things like that, but just had some questions as far as what is our gifted program and do we receive said reports? And then are participants identified or designated through an IEP process, or how does this all work if we have a policy kind of surrounding gifted? I was just in the larger sense kind of curious.
Go ahead. So typically at the high school level, you have honors and AP classes. I think that was 2 years ago that this policy was brought into place because a lot of elementary districts were not offering gifted placement for the, usually it's typically third grade and up. But most high schools just track the students based on AP and honor enrollment.
So I wonder if that's an effective use of the language for what we offer. Not to mention, we have students of all abilities and levels who place into honors and AP placements. And gifted might be an exclusionary tag there. I don't know. I'm kind of just thinking it may not be the most up-to-date language, but perhaps I'm wrong. It seems misaligned, especially when we do use that term in elementary education. Seems somewhat misaligned for our uses in the district.
Yeah, in looking at this, I almost think that I wonder if this is even relevant. And we
Yeah,
just
that's
have
kind of
policy.
what I'm getting at. Yeah.
It was a policy just in case, but I don't know.
There used to be funding tied to a program like this, but that phased out many years ago, but that's still, even on state budget forms, like that's still a
Language.
category to put things under. So no, it certainly could be outdated, but even the state hasn't really caught up with it.
Okay.
Because I think in some of our other policies, we talk about, having a more open enrollment process for
Right.
advanced placement courses and things like that. So we're sort of speaking out of both sides of our mouth. So I think that's an
Precisely.
excellent idea.
Okay.
And to piggyback on this, I think this may be one that we may want to visit some alternative language, because this really implies, if you read the first statement, superintendent or designee shall design an education program for the gifted.
Right.
And, in my mind, we really don't have a gifted program. We have AP programs.
Correct.
We have other programs
Students
to,
and their parents and their counselors work together to design.
yeah,
their
yeah.
school.
So I just wonder if there's a way that we can.
Yeah, so I followed up with press here, and it says that the state law controls the policy's content to the extent that districts can qualify for state funding for the education of gifted and talented children, should such funding be available, through the Illinois compiled statutes. While a policy on programs for gifted and talented children is not required, a policy on accelerated placement is required, and that's in our next one on 6135 then. So this was adopted in 2006 and there hasn't been any changes. So, and it could be one that,
One that could be eliminated.
Yeah.
yeah.
There's no more funding available.
No, and really that first paragraph designates in order to qualify for state funding, should such funding become available. And if that's not a thing, I think it questions the necessity for the policy.
Mm-hmm.
I'll follow up and see if we can.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bryant, I'm curious, is the new policy, or because I know you know these very sequentially, the one that talks about students who are proficient in a certain category of class, let's say college prep, how they would be automatically placed in honors the following year. I know that was new since 2 years ago. I'm wondering if it's under instruction or is that an equity policy? You know which one I'm talking
Yeah.
about? It's a state law that went into effect that during COVID, and I know it was one of those, how are we implementing it really well? I think it's going to be a somewhat change in practice for some of us. So I'd want to make sure the board understands that and that we have it reflected in our policies.
I will have to look that one up. See where.
Just for the board's knowledge, that particular policy is to try and across the state of Illinois, make sure that as students are, let's say, in a remedial class their freshman year, and once they're gaining proficiency, if they get a C or better, that we don't maintain them in remedial classes. That our default should be, once you've gained proficiency in that you then get elevated to be with your peer group or to be challenged more to try and overcome some of the barriers that we're seeing to all kids being represented in honors classes. So that, I know that's a law. I just couldn't quite see which, and I think it would be under instruction, like how, almost like this gifted policy, the idea of making sure, how are we ensuring all kids are challenged?
Were we referring to that as diagonal mobility?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is, but rather than having it be optional
Yeah.
almost, the state law now requires that we have a system in place, and the parent and the student can deny it, say, nope, I'm happy. But they said our default should be to continue to challenge students rather than have it be up to them to make that leap.
I have a couple more in different sections. On page 18, which is 6200 instructional arrangements, in the section that says individualized instruction. This section just kind of lacked specificity for me. I couldn't really determine who was being referenced. So the policy says provision for individual differences shall be given high priority in planning the instructional program, in choosing teaching methods and materials, and in evaluating results. But I couldn't tell if we were referencing teachers or students. So is that a commentary on teachers' autonomy, or is that a commentary on like individualized learning plans for students or differentiating instruction? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think I'm not clear on what shall be given high priority.
So, yeah, I think I had, right. How do we measure? How do you measure that? How do you indicate high priority? How do you determine what requires high priority? It just seemed very general, like I said, lacking specificity.
I think also the language here about team teaching versus co-teaching and some other things, I think we definitely need to update this
Yeah,
policy
it's-
beyond where it is now. Mhm.
And then not only that, it kind of got me thinking about really how will this policy change? What will it reflect when we address our grading policy upcoming? And that's coming down the pike. So it may be this policy may be a bit of a moving target, if you will, but yeah. And then, finally, I had one on page 31. You know what? It may have been on. Oof. I may have
Page-
miscited this. It was about, maybe Bryant will know it just off the top of his head, about passing an examination on patriotism and principles of representative government, proper use of the flag, methods of voting, and the Pledge of Allegiance.
That's 6,300 graduation requirements,
You have a page number on that, Bryant?
page 30.
Thank you. Oh, okay. I skipped up one. So my question was. And then it says the superintendent or designee shall determine the criteria for number 4. But is that our government test that happens? When does that happen? Junior year? Senior year? Okay, so is that the test that they're,
I don't think it's a exact test. I think it's embedded in that course. So
Mhm.
passing the course implies that you've met the standards
Okay.
embedded here.
okay.
Yeah, it's not one thing that students sit for.
So does this language, I guess, reflect what we do?
Not saying passing an examination. That definitely needs to be updated.
Okay,
What is that?
The other
Good
thing,
call. What?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm dating myself
I've-
here. We're in good
Yes.
company. Casey
Yeah.
dated herself earlier, but yeah, 20 years ago, there was a test,
Right.
an actual test, right?
Good catch.
and I know that this would be one with Yesenia coming on board. We are preparing, the state of Illinois will be changing its graduation requirements starting in 2027. So we're going to need to be having a committee work on that and saying, what will that look like for us? So just to put that on your radar, that's not immediate, but within the next year or so, we're going to need to say, all right, so if all students need to have a world language, what does that mean for some of the other areas? So we'll be bringing that forward.
Yeah. Career pathways and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I was reading, the way it's written in the Public Act on this one is that, that's exactly the way it says that an examination on patriotism and principles of representation, government, proper use of flag, methods of voting, and Pledge of Allegiance that you must, pass. Without passing a status for examination upon such subjects which may be administered remotely. So there has to be a test on those subjects. Now, it doesn't mean it's one test. It just has to be, you have to get tested on those subjects. So that's right from the Public Act. So we can't, looking at that, we can't have the ability to change that. Which they, in those classes, they're taking multiple tests. So,
So the examination piece can stay.
yeah,
Okay,
it has to stay.
yeah,
Yeah, it's not necessarily all on one test. like
Correct.
grade
Yeah.
has one test that they have to, but over the course of that semester of gov, they've got to prove that they
Mm-hmm.
understand all of those concepts within a series of exams.
thank you for addressing
Mhm.
it. Those were my critiques,
Is it-
my notes.
Great. Well,
Thank you.
Those are great ones. Yeah. Anyone else have some comments? So we have a few we're going to check into and look at.
Mhm.
Those are great catches. Thank you, Kara.
My only note is, I think it's important to recognize we've had in policy 665, student social and emotional development as part of our policy since 2016. And although our strategic plan has made health and wellness one of our strategic goals, that it's certainly not new to the district policy.
It's a great point. And I think just this whole process of, for those maybe out there and watching, or for some of the new folks, we began this process of sort of cycling through our board policies, on a 2-year cycle. And I think it's been very helpful because we'll find those things that we just didn't notice before, didn't realize before. So I think it's been very helpful, and we'll continue to do that. So I'm not too sure how many boards do this, but highly recommended. So. Okay, anything else? Okay. Moving on, employment of employees is next. The personnel report. A handful of educational support staff and some coaching extracurricular staff. Any questions or comments on those? No? Okay, we will see those again at the board meeting. Educational tours, we have 3 here.
Yes, the first one is the gymnastics team. They're heading over to Camp Hickory for some team building in November, and the cost is going to be $50 per student. Followed by the Snowcats, who plan several ski trips. Most of them are day trips, but there is one overnight during the MLK weekend in January. And they do have the students paying about $415, although they are going to engage in some fundraising. And then the next one is an ed tour to Rome for the band. And that will be for the New Year's Day parade in 2024. Right now, the cost is slated at $3,600 per student, but they have put together a fundraising plan where they're going to be, they've listed about 7 fundraisers that they're going to engage in from now until then to help offset some of the cost, as well as they have their booster association who is going to be supporting some students. And if there are students who are on free and reduced lunch and can't afford to go on the trip, they have some rollover funds, they call, from fundraising that's happened in prior years and students haven't used. So if they have to tap into those funds, they will do that as well.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments on any of these? We were just talking about Rome, and yeah, I think we'd all like to do that one.
Looks like a great opportunity, and I appreciate the detail that the room trip went into with the significant fundraising efforts. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on those? Okay, we'll see those at the meeting. Board governance handbook. Okay, exciting. See what this looks like. Anyone want to step
Oh,
us through?
I'll launch it. Lisa and I took our draft and polished it a bit and filled in a few of the gaps. And so what you have before you is the product that we collaboratively generated. We wanted to get this firm and approved. And then our second task, some of the things we put into the new member orientation, and there'll be some other ancillary materials. But we wanted to make sure we focused on getting this particular document approved, and then we'll go on to some of the other.
I wanted to add that the board governance handbook talks about how the board does its work together. It's not meant to supersede district policy or be a supplement to the policy. The policy is what the district does. This board governance handbook is how does the board engage in the work. And this was something that we developed over the course of 2 long evening sessions together as a board. And hopefully everybody will see their ideas reflected in this product. It was a really exciting endeavor. And I really want to thank Dr. Herman. It was so great working together with you on this. I found the whole process extremely collaborative, and I found that your experience in multiple districts and multiple roles was incredibly helpful. And collaborating with you is great. You know, I don't get to work directly one-on-one with you every day. And this was a chance to really roll up our sleeves and put some meat on the bones of how we want to work together as a governance team. And it was a great experience getting to work with you and really appreciate how collaborative you are. It was a lot of fun. And I really appreciate everybody's efforts in every single one of us really dug in and had some meaningful contributions and words and ideas that went into this. So I'm really excited that we're able to bring this to fruition. So thank you to everyone.
I appreciate the links to the relevant policies that govern how we work together. That, kind of made it more succinct. If someone wants to, they can go and read those policies and further understand how we work together as a board. And that was one of the things we talked about in our meeting repeatedly, is making sure we had those links in there. So
That reminds me, a special shout out to Carol Scoden, who
always,
we
it should be every meeting.
It's because well said. In this particular case, once we got the words and the ideas down, it was really Carol that brought the finished product together
The
and
index and the pagination and all of that. She did a wonderful job.
yeah, the organization and the professionalism that she brought to the finished document really couldn't have happened without her. So special thanks to Carol
We'll be sure to recognize her at the meeting.
for sure.
Yeah. So this is great. Is there a process for any additional comments, whatever that you would like to have back from us after really digging into this a little bit and making sure that if we find a typo or something
I
that
think
we,
this is the opportunity.
this is the opportunity?
Yeah, for us to discuss it. If there's anything that you are hoping to see that isn't there, or if something is worded in a way that needs to be further tweaked, I think you'll see that there are no new ideas in here from our last session together. There were a couple of areas that we had circled and highlighted and said, oh, this area needs work. The idea was agreed on, but how we worded it was not completely finished. So you'll see that in the finished product. But yes, I think we're hoping tonight to have any discussion if there are things that are of concern or need to be further addressed.
And then it would be our intention to bring this back for formal approval by the board as the document that would guide how the board works moving
Okay.
forward.
I thought it reflected our conversation brilliantly. I took it as the lens of being one of the newer board members. Would this have helped me on board to understand my role and understand what we do? I think it's going to be very helpful to a new board member coming up. I wish we had had this. So I think it's clear, it's plain, and it doesn't go too deep because we don't need to go too deep. That's not the purpose of it. It's more of a guidance of how we interact. So I appreciate it. Thank you for having all of our comments and including everything.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you for all your feedback. And I like the way that it's set up because it's clear paragraphs and simple text and not a lot of stuff to read for someone who's not a reader like me. I think it's easy to kind of follow and understand.
And going forward, once we adopt it at the next meeting, it would be our intention every 2 years to pull it out and look at it. It can be changed by consensus of the board. So if 2 years from now, there's something we forgot to address or something that no longer reflects the way that we want to work together, we have a document, but it's going to be a living, breathing document that we pull out every 2 years and make sure that it's reflective of the way that we want to work together.
And I would imagine if something significant changes, like something changes in policy or requirements by the state or something that impacts any of this, we can review this at any time. It's a living document. It's not,
Correct.
it's not going to be hard and fast for a set period of time. But I like the idea of, just like we do with our board policy, at least every 2 years, we pull this out, we review it, make sure it's still on target. But yeah, I think it's a great document, and it's not, we saw some that were very voluminous, I'll put it, and unnecessarily. And I think this captures just the right amount of depth, and then refers to the other documentation and things that it needs to. So
I think one other benefit will be, once approved, we'll post this on our website under the Board of Education. So the public will know some of these protocols and ways that what board members can do, and also what you say that's not part of our purview. So it will be public knowledge and add to the ways you can communicate with the public about your role in your work.
Yeah, I think for transparency's sake, it's really a positive all around.
Yeah, in my mind, that's almost as important as us having it for ourselves. Because I think one of the things that I was impressed as we discussed these topics and worked together over those 2 nights is how really in tune all of us are with our role and with the board's role and with how we should behave and how we should be working together and how. And so I don't think that there's a lot of things in here that any of us would read and say, oh, I never knew that. You know, this is all pretty good stuff. And I think we all understood it. For the public to understand exactly the context in which we work, I think is very important. And I think that'll be very helpful.
Thank you, Lisa and Denise. You did a great job of taking our skeleton of comments and flushing it out into a real working document. So I appreciate the time and effort that took.
Great. Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll have it on the agenda for the board meeting. Okay. Last item for discussion, joint annual conference. And we have some information here, some just to confirm attendance at various things.
Right. So Carol and I are just triple checking, making sure we have the rooms reserved for the evenings. But more importantly is to make sure we know who's going to be at which date so we can plan for dinners and just things like that to make sure we aren't accidentally leaving anyone out of non-session kind of team building that we might want to be doing. So one thing that would be helpful is confirming, it looks like Friday night versus Saturday night. Would there be an opportunity for us to have a more group gathering or do both or whatever that is? I know last year we were able to do a Friday evening dinner. Most were able to attend that, and I thought that was nice. It's not in a large group. It's something where it's just our team getting to process what we've learned at the conference. So just looking at who's going to be there on which days and things like that, wanting your preference. We are all invited to a dinner with our architects on Saturday night. So I didn't know if maybe that we wanted to be that group dinner and maybe we'll do something for our team on Friday night. So I just wanted to make sure you all had opportunities for input as Carol and I secure reservations.
I think I'm the only one that is not scheduled to be at the hotel Friday night. If we are going to do that dinner Friday, I can make arrangements to be there Friday. I just will not be there for the sessions on a Friday. I have to be there for the sessions on Saturday.
Okay.
So if that is the night that we want to do that, I can make arrangements for that.
I'm in the same position. I'm not going to be there Friday during the day, but we would like to come down for the 5:30 Heims Petrarca Fester reception
Yeah.
and then
Maybe do
dinner after that if everybody's amenable.
Yep, that works.
That works.
Okay. Then we will work on that. And if you can just, again, if you see anything that's not accurate in terms of what you had reported to Carol and I, let us know and we'll make the adjustments.
Oh.
And otherwise
Is it too late to tell Carol that I would need a room?
no,
for
we can
Friday?
add that now. Yes. Yeah.
Should we email you and Carolyn back on some of these that says attending and it's blank just to confirm?
Please. Yeah. If it's blank, I think we weren't
Okay.
maybe 100% sure based on the feedback you've given so far. Yep.
Okay. Everyone good with that? And future agenda items, we have some items here on the list. October summer camps and summer school presentation for the October board meeting, along with the student achievement goals. You can read these. I don't need to read all these to you. We have November, December, and January's listed here. Anything else that anyone would feel strongly about adding to any of these or offer as a suggestion? Okay,
I thought this would be helpful. Oops, went a lot louder. Having what we intend to bring to you a few
Mhm.
months out, so you have an idea. So, because sometimes you don't know to ask us to bring. So I wanted to make sure we got in the habit of foreshadowing these things for you. And then if you see anything missing or want to make sure that we bring a certain facet of an issue, that you have the opportunity to let us know as we're developing whatever presentation.
I was just gonna add, I know there's LHS Daring Day. And then I think there's an evening invite for parents to give feedback. It would be nice to get some kind of feedback from that day and that exercise.
So you're referring to it's coming up this Wednesday.
Yep.
And it is where the state of Illinois has, or excuse me, the PSAT day. So where juniors would be taking that for national merit. So what we do is we alter the schedule. And so freshmen and sophomores will be doing two other very specified activities, one about social emotional learning and one more about career exploration. Seniors are given the day to do college applications and to do college visits and things like that. So it is definitely a unique day in our schedule. So I know they're planning to get feedback from students. I will check and see what kind of feedback they are going to plan to get from parents, and we can share that with you.
Good idea.
Okay, anything else? Okay, that concludes our agenda for the Program and Personnel Committee. We'll call this meeting adjourned.
Anybody need a 5-minute break before we?
Maybe two, I just need some water.
We will convene at 6:20. How about that? 5 minutes? Okay, this calls to order the Facilities and Finance meeting for Monday, October 10th. It's 6:18 PM. We've already done the pledge. Invitation for public comment. Is there anyone present that would like to offer public comment? Mary, we have? No, okay. Moving on, our agenda includes the 2022 estimated tax levy presentation, one of the most important things we do as a board. Capital projects prioritization, fiscal year 2023 state maintenance project grant, and then a list of future agenda items. I believe we are going to flip-flop the capital projects prioritization, start with that, and then move on to the tax levy. Is that okay with you, Dan? Okay. So we will start with capital projects.
1 second.
We're giving Dan a minute to catch up.
Okay, so from a previous committee meeting, I don't know if it was last month, I can't remember, either last month or the month before. We brought to you a list of draft criteria in a bigger, which is part of a bigger conversation about how do we prioritize our capital projects? Because the reality we face is that there is not enough money to do every project that everybody wants to do. And so you have to prioritize. And that's tricky. And so we are trying to find a meaningful way to prioritize, to value the things that we value. And so our first step into that was try to develop criteria. And the intention with this criteria is to be very open and honest and public about the criteria so that people understand the process and it's clear the criteria by which we are using. So we had a previous discussion where we talked through the criteria, see what was missing. One of the comments that I took back was adding in a consideration of a connection to health, life, safety. And so we have added that in as a category of criteria, as a criteria. And then what we said was the next step is really kind of flesh out a draft of descriptors. So in each of those criteria, really there will be a rating. And I try to keep it as simple as I can. So all of this is very, very draft. Like this is what you're seeing right now is a very draft form that even DLT is looking at and adding comments and thoughts. So this is a very, very beginning stage of development. So what you will see is all of the descriptors and kind of like a guiding question that's really after, a guiding question that's after each criteria. And essentially descriptors that help you with how to score each particular item. The draft where it is right now is 1 through 3, but we're even talking about, it's a way to adjust that with keeping it simple, but don't let it get too simple, but don't let it get too complicated. So we're trying to find this balance. So the intention is a fewfold. One, to bring you back these criteria to say we added that category based on our conversation last time. We've added descriptors, which makes it a much more lengthy thing to you understand and kind of flesh out the things that we're trying to look for. And then the third thing that I did is I put together like a brief and not very pretty, like a flow chart to give a sense of like this is what we're talking about. The prioritization is like one part of a bigger process. And even that process is one part of a bigger process. But for now, what I have for you is to see that in the steps of prioritizing our capital projects, the step we're talking about is the criteria by which we will categorize them, or we will score them, and then they get categorized. So if I go to the flow chart, for example, you'll see that it starts, and the first step will be that we're gathering data that we want to use to be able to evaluate a capital project. So that right now that's in the form of a form. We haven't developed the form yet, but that's the idea, is there would be a form, and then that data is evaluated based on this criteria and these descriptors in their final form, not in their draft form. And then once we have all of those, we have them scored, then we will categorize the projects into one of really 5 major categories. This is a safety issue. This is a maintenance issue. This is an educational priority. This is related to efficiency or improvement or aesthetics, general appearance. There are many things that are in multiple categories, but the idea is primarily where does this fall into? And one thing I would say is maintenance, in my opinion, needs to be high, because if you don't address it, then it can turn into a safety issue. And so we want to be as preventive as we can. So thankfully, a lot of the things we're dealing with are not safety issues. A lot of the things that we're talking about are preferences, various priorities that we're still trying to work through. And there are definitely things that are on there that are about, we would like to just make this better. So after that, then we would categorize them, based on the category, and then they would be ranked by, essentially by score in each of those categories. So the feedback that I'm looking for is, you've had a chance to see the criteria before. Now you've seen it again with that addition of the health, life, safety. How does that feel? Any feedback on that in terms of like, maybe this piece is missing? And then a chance for you to look at the descriptors. And so you are welcome to give me feedback right now. If you'd prefer to take some time and want to give me more feedback later, or if you want access to a document that you can just add in comments and stuff like that, I'm happy to help figure that part out too, with you. So wanted to keep moving our process along with also giving you something meaningful to consider as we get closer to figuring this out.
Dan, within the categories, so organizational alignment, student impact, and system improvement, those are all ranked the same, right? None of them are given a heavier rank than the other?
Correct. It was just a way to try to organize the criteria. Like I had just a huge list of criteria. And honestly, it was Denise's recommendation, is the way that we can kind of like make this feel not as big. And so based on just looking at them and kind of putting them together, it seemed like these were the three themes that came out of there, but not any one theme is more important than another.
Yeah, and I agree with the categories. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't rating any of them heavier than the others.
So just to be clear, what can you describe maybe a timeline for when we want some of this solidified and when we're going to start using this, just to get an idea of how quickly we need to respond?
I would like to have this figured out before the calendar year is done.
Okay.
Because we want to use this to inform our summer projects. And so we're working on the back end. Mark's working on different projects lining up. Like, and the piece I would say is like, this is just listing the prioritization. This is not saying these are the projects we're doing next. Because even doing a project requires other things to line up. You need resources to line up. So say we say like a $50 million project is the most important one we want, but if we don't have $50 million, then we can't reasonably do that. Another thing that we're dealing with is supply chain issues. So Mark trying to anticipate what is he going to be able to get within a 10-week window next summer is very, very difficult to predict. And so he's actively trying to figure out, all right, what projects can I move? Because if I can't get it when school is out and have it ready for that, like, then I can't do that project. So Univents, for example, was one of the things on his list that he's realizing he's not going to be able to get in time for summer. And so he's trying to kind of move some pieces around. So logistics is another thing that we're trying to figure out too, that feeds into like what we actually do versus what we want to do, right? So the prioritization tells us as a system, these are the things we want to do. And then we're faced with reality of honestly, a lot of logistics.
I appreciate you bringing us into this conversation as these criteria and the flow of how it's going to work is being developed. I want to be clear, though, that the board will not be involved in answering these questions. This is a process that will be undertaken at the building and the district level. And when we are presented as a board with a project for approval, the thought process behind it, including these criteria and how the decision was reached to recommend this project, will be included, but the board is not going to be involved at this granular level.
It's not my intention for you to be.
It is not my
That's a good
intention
point.
for us to be, and I just
Good
wanted
point.
to be sure that not only were we clear, but the public was clear, that those aren't conversations that the board is going to participate in, and that I'm very grateful that you're getting our input on how these descriptions are being developed and how the criteria is being developed, so that when we are presented with a project, we've already agreed on and participated in, the development of the criteria and how things will be prioritized, but we as a board will not be. answering the questions in the descriptions. And I
Correct.
just want to be crystal clear on that.
Absolutely.
And Dan has shared this also with the district leadership team. We've had some rich discussion on, this criteria so that we're involved with it, so that as we prioritize this, that he's not just throwing a piece of paper that he came up with, that we were involved in discussion. So I think our leadership team had some rich discussion, just like you are. Some of the same questions you're asking, we're asking too, that we've asked.
Great. That's good to know.
Yeah, I think the overall intention for this is we want to be able to prioritize our projects in a meaningful way that makes sense, because for you to know, but also when we have to say we are not going to do this project and instead we're going to do this project, that we have I think a clear data and transparent criteria for people to understand. Because behind every project that you've ever seen, or a list that you've seen, or lists you haven't seen, are some very, very passionate people that really want this project to happen for a variety of fantastic reasons. Just the fundamentals we face is there's just not enough money to do all of it, right? There never is. So we have to figure out a process to prioritize these things. And this is our attempt at trying to do that in the best way that we can. So I know some of the descriptors help kind of flesh out, like, what are you really trying to get after? What is meaningful? Some of those things we're still trying to figure out.
Thank you always for taking everyone's feedback and coming back with an update. I always appreciate that. I have sort of two questions. I think one that Casey, you alluded to, is where you have the broad categories. Are those going to be weighted as in one is more important than the other? Or are they all considered of equal weight or equal importance?
There is no category, there is no broad category like so what you're talking about is you're referencing.
No, so if I were to pick an example, are we going to say, for example, daring mission alignment will always be more important than, I'm picking something, urgency, deferral, impact? Or are we going to say that they're all equally important?
Right now, it's a good question. Right now, the answer in my head is that we would be assigning weight to figure out some things that are more important than others, because not everything can be the most important. But we haven't really fleshed that out. So there's not one broad category. So what I meant was there's not like organizational alignment is not a greater weighting than student impact, but you could have criteria in there that, like, for example, number of students, like if this can affect a ton of students, like that means more to us than something else. And so we haven't really fleshed out weighting yet. So weighting is still a huge thing that we're still trying to navigate through. But we don't have progress on that yet.
We know that in your workplace, you do some of this work. So if there are any
Give us some
strategies or
examples.
models that you'd like to share with us, we would be open to. Not that it's the same, obviously you're working with different content, but the idea of here's an example of how this particular project group rated this one higher priority and weighted it this way. And the other criteria is lesser weighted.
Yep, I'd be happy to share. I mean, I had one more question.
No, but on that same topic, if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
just to piggyback on that, in terms of weighting, what I might suggest is to actually take this and we get this framework and run a couple projects through this weighting system or through the prioritization system and just see how they fall. Because I think in general, we've been doing this for many, many, many years, maybe over 100 years in terms of prioritizing our capital projects each year. And often it's done, very effectively. But I understand the need to do some sort of transparent, this is how we're going to structure this. But I think it would be helpful to in order to see if there's some areas that may need to be weighted in a certain way to get the results we really need, or to, more importantly, to exclude those unanticipated, things that happen, that all of a sudden things get really low or things get really high in an unanticipated way. So maybe just taking, a dozen or taking last year's projects and just run them through this model and see what it looks like. So thank you.
Yep, no problem. And my second kind of question was on your flow chart, there is a box that says categorize projects and there's a bunch of categories.
Mhm.
Are those supposed to be the same as the ones on the organizational alignment, the colorful, or they're separate?
Those are separate.
So that's what is throwing me.
Sure. So the broad, so the broad categories that the criteria are just organized around are just to try to get a sense of, they're trying to get a sense of the general categorization, I guess, of the criteria we're talking about, but each project needs to get categorized into either this is a safety issue, this is a maintenance issue, or this is an educational priority. So this is, once we've scored all of those, then we categorize them into one of those 5 areas. And it's really those 5 areas. So basically, if something's a safety issue, it's getting done first, like no matter what it's scored relative to something else that it maybe is an aesthetics issue. To say that at the end of the day, so it really, the idea is the weighting is, or the scoring is really in that category. It tells you what's prioritized in that category.
So we need to add very clear definitions to what constitutes safety versus maintenance versus educational priority. So if that's like an automatic, what is safety? Having all of us be on the same page by what constitutes something going from maintenance to safety is going to be really important too.
And likewise, if it falls into multiple categories.
Right.
Because it might be a safety issue, it might be a maintenance issue, and it may be instructional in nature, all combined. So it's, how those things would be weighted. Because again, getting back to sort of the concept of running running projects through the model. If that's the case, then purely aesthetic things will never get done. And there may be some aesthetic things that almost fall into maintenance or almost, that you might consider, or they're small enough projects that to get done. I don't know. I'm just, I think there's some nuances there that we need to look at in terms of those categories and how they combine and or, weigh against each other.
Yeah, I think the idea is, I definitely think some will be in multiple categories. But I think the idea was that we should be able to clearly define, and you would know primarily what category this falls into. Like roofs, for example, the roof getting replaced like that. It's not leaking, it's not a safety issue right now, but it needs to get replaced so that it doesn't become a safety issue. But it also could be a not very pretty looking roof. Or you could have a roof that's perfectly functional. I'm just using that as an example, that it's perfectly functionally roofed, but it's not very pretty. We may just say like, we need to prioritize other things about this. But yeah, I agree, fleshing out those definitions to be, again, making sure it's clear why something is ranked above something else.
Yeah, my fear would be somebody would generate a project that insists it's a safety issue when it's maybe not really a safety issue, but just to get the priority up. But
Correct. Yeah, it would not be the person submitting it that tells it that, like, they would probably indicate in what category they think it would be in, but it really would be the review committee that figures out what category it truly belongs into.
Any other comments?
I think I may have to just look at this when I'm thinking a little more clearly, the flow chart, because I'm getting a bit lost in it.
Mhm.
I can ask you offline and then we can come back again. I don't want to take up everyone's time.
This isn't anything we're gonna be voting on at the next meeting. We're just continuing to refine and reflect on what we want this to look like. So,
Mhm.
thank you, Dan. I know it's a lot of work. We
good work.
appreciate it. Yeah, it's something we need to do, put a framework around this. So, any other comments? Or-
Can I just confirm that the discussion we had was helpful in terms of you moving forward? Okay,
Yeah, and
Because-
if you look and have more feedback, like, yeah, I'd love to hear it. Because it was helpful, like, for example, like, one of the feedback that, you all shared last meeting was the idea of having the strategic plan, should it say 3 or should it stay 1? And then we met the next day, I think, and talked as a DLT, and the sense from DLT was unanimous that it should stay 3. And so that's why, like, all right, I kept that as 3. I guess I didn't tell you that, but that was an example, like we flushed through that and kept that there, but went back and changed something else. So this is all very helpful feedback, because at the end of the day, you're going to be voting on these projects, and to move forward with them. And there's a lot of action that you will eventually be involved with. And I think it'd be helpful for you to have the appropriate data to say, this is why we were behind this project and not this other project.
Is there a milestone date coming up? The reason for my question about whether or not this discussion will help move things forward. I don't want you to feel as though you're still waiting for feedback from the board before you can move forward. So is there a date by which, if we have further questions about this or thoughts, it would be helpful for you to have those questions?
Probably. I mean, I could guess the end of the week, but I don't, that might be somewhat arbitrary. So I don't know. All I know is like this will get tweaks. Like, what I don't want to do is get to a late stage and have major changes.
Sure.
We're for this part of the step of descriptors, like we're in the major changes stage. So we can make major changes to what we're doing now. So if the sense was like, well, this doesn't sound like anything we talked about, or this is really not heading in the right direction, then we have the opportunity to make major changes to it. Once we get much past this point, then we're really more talking about minor changes in order to keep the timeline moving.
Okay.
Sounds good. Okay, are we ready to move on to tax levy presentation? Okay. Take it away, Dan.
All right. Thank you, Eli. Good point. Give me 1 second. Just checking to make sure it's popping up. Let me try that again. Got it now? Okay. Okay, so this might be one of the most important levy approvals that I've ever seen in my career. And so I've tried to let you know that this is coming, and it's finally here. So I'm partly really excited, partly terrified. So let me walk you through.
You and me both.
There's a lot here. And I know there's a lot here, but this decision before you quite simply will either secure our financial stability or it won't. That's really what's facing you at this point. So let me walk through some important details. Last year, it was funny, last year I remembered, wow, this was my first meeting back after having my baby. So I had baby pictures. I thought about putting baby pictures, but I didn't. She's a year old, but she's really cute.
Mistake.
Yeah.
But the last slide I had was I had one more thing to share from you. And this was the slide I had last year to let you know we have something big coming for this levy year. The Libertyville TIF expiring. It's a significant thing that happens. That is not something that happens every year or every 35 years, as we'll talk about. So here we are. So here's what I wanted to do. I'm going to quickly give you just a sense of like the context of what we're talking about. So a quick overview of our funding sources. Where does the district get money from? I'm going to have a brief conversation about the process. Like, where are we in this levy and extension process? I'm not going to go through explaining the whole thing of what a levy is, how does assessments work. We're not going to do that this year. But but I'm gonna briefly tell you like where we're at and some economic conditions that we find ourselves in. Then I'm gonna show you data that's important to know because of the economic conditions we're in. What would our extension data look like, our tax levy data look like without the TIF? Because this is a monumental year regardless of the TIF. Adding the TIF on makes it even more out of the ordinary. So I'm really going to show you like two versions of this. The first version is if the TIF was not part of this conversation, because even that alone is very significant. And then with the TIF adds more significance to what's happening. And there is a lot of opportunity for confusion in this process. And I think it will help you and the community to know and understand like what's really happening here. Because I think this is significant for the district. So sources of revenue. So as a reminder, the district gets money from basically three major sources: the local community, which is mostly property taxes, that'd be like interest income, school fees. We get money from the state. That's evidence-based funding is the primary method. We get reimbursements for special education, transportation. And then federal money, primarily we get that through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding and through title grants, things like that. This is a chart to show you the uniqueness of District 128 relative to everything else. We're not relative, you find a lot of this on the North Shore of Chicago, but what you find on average in the United States is state and local share essentially a mostly equal portion on average in the United States, and then the federal kicks in some money. In Illinois, what you find is about 2/3 of it is local, and then about a little less than a third, about a quarter from the state, and the rest picked up by federal. So when you hear people talk about our state is more heavily reliant on property taxes, or you'll hear too heavily reliant on property taxes, this is what it means. The sources of funding is more reliant on property taxes. And to be honest, when you have a system that is more reliant on property taxes are reliant on the values that are there. So what you will have is a system that has inequity across the state. That's why you will find, even in our own county, across the street, the funding system of a district is vastly different. And to be honest, that's because of the system that the state has created for funding this. So that's what typically you find on average in Illinois. But for District 128, the vast majority of our revenues come from the local, which the vast majority of that is property taxes. So there's very little control that you have on other sources of revenue. You don't really control how much money you get from the state. You don't control really how much money you get from the federal. But you have significant control over your levy. But there are a lot of rules around it. And my job is to make sure that you're informed of those parameters so that you make an informed decision, because honestly, like, this is a significant part of district operations. So I usually have a slide to like remind people, one of the things that puts context over property taxes is inflation. Inflation is the rise of cost of goods over a period of time. And so we're constantly trying to keep pace with inflation. And so there's laws that kind of really help us do that. But lately it's been crazy. I don't know if you've heard, but CPI for last year being 7, and doesn't 7 sound like a low number now? Right? So like it's at 8 is I think the most recent-ish number that I've heard. So inflation is crazy high, which is problematic in a number of ways. But another way now is property taxes. And I think the way our system is, I think largely people have been protected from inflation as far as it comes from property taxes, but here it is. So in terms of the levy and extension process, so what are we talking about? So I want to just remind some terms. So when I'm talking about the levy, that is the amount of tax revenue that we are requesting. We actually ask for dollars. We don't ask for a tax rate. We ask for a bucket of money is what I like to say. Now the extension is the amount of money that we're approved to get. So what we ask for and what we actually get, actually what we ask for and what we're approved to get are different numbers. And actually what we are approved to get and what we actually get are even different numbers because not everybody pays their taxes, right? Almost everybody does, but not everybody does. So it's important to know when we're talking about the money, the dollars that we're requesting. And when we say levy, really technically what's happening, it's many levies, but we always kind of smush them together and just tell you this is the levy. But just to be clear, technically it's separate levies, but we aggregate them together to show you, but I will always show you like the total and then them separately because that's legally what's happening is they're all separate levies that get filed. So we have the core, which are the most common levies, and then the other side is ones that may be less common depending on the district that you're in. So the levy and extension process. So there's really 5 steps to this process. The first one is to plan for it. And that's something that my team does is plan for this. The next step is to adopt that. And that is what we're asking you to do in November. And then we file that with the county clerk. And then later in the spring of next year, the county clerk will extend taxes based on the legal rules, the calculations, what we asked for. They'll extend that to us. And then they'll double check that with us. And then those get sent over to the county treasurer, who then issues the tax bills. And then once they get the money from the taxpayers, they then distribute those taxes back to us. So that's the process. We're in the step of planning and we're actually done planning. We're really at the adopt levy stage of kind of sharing this information with you tonight and for the next 3 meetings. So when we're estimating the levy, figuring out what are we legally going to be allowed to access by law, it's an algebraic formula with 4 variables. Right now, we know for sure what 2 of them are, and we don't know what 2 of them are. We get estimates from the county that helps us get a sense of what those are, and those are helpful estimates, and we try to make sure we're getting as close to the actual numbers as we can. And I will just say, I was at a meeting on Friday, and we in Lake County are very fortunate because over in Cook County, it is a very different story. They still don't even have last year's extensions. So if you have to approve this by the last Tuesday in December by law, and you don't even know what your extension was last year, like that makes it even more difficult. So we're more fortunate than really dear friends that are very close to us that are in a much difficult situation than we are. But we will know those other variables in the spring. Unfortunately, we have to approve our levy by the last Tuesday in December. So we have to guess, but we try to make accurate guesses, and we've been pretty accurate so far. Okay, so that's the levy process. Now I need to kind of pause, and we need to do a little bit more learning about a TIF, what a TIF is, because this is crucially important. And I've talked a little bit before, but I need to talk more now so that you really understand what's happening. So tax increment financing districts, TIF districts. This is, I know, sorry, I'm kind of looking at there. This is a tool for local governments. So when you hear local government, you think municipalities. This is not a tool for us, for school districts. This is a tool for villages, cities, those kinds of things. And what it's intended to be is a catalyst for redevelopment, right? So it's meant something to spur on redevelopment in an area that's considered blighted, like blighted, rundown. It's got a legal definition with it, but that's important. And so what happens is at the beginning of a TIF district, so tax increment financing district, whatever the values were at the beginning of that TIF are frozen to the other taxing bodies. So for the schools, the libraries, whatever else is there, whatever that value was frozen. So for example, Melody Farms is a TIF. Whatever that property was when it was just kind of vacant land, whatever that value was then, that's the value to us now and for the next 23 years, no matter what happens there, whether it goes up or if it goes down, really. But the idea is as that property gets more valuable, because the idea is we spur on development and it will get more valuable, the increment value that is taxed, that because the people that are there pay taxes, that value goes into the TIF fund. And they can use that for infrastructure improvements, things like that. So when you're throughout the entire life of a TIF, you always really have 2 numbers that you're trying to, that I watch and are aware of. One is the frozen base. What was the frozen value? And so I know that for every TIF we have. And then we watch what is the increment value. So the increment value is what is that additional value that has been generated by the TIF since its inception. So we watch those. And so really you have to remember, so that you have the initial EAV plus the increment equals the total EAV. And the total EAV is what the taxpayers that live there or that are in that zone pay based on their total value. So basically for a taxpayer that is in a district, in a TIF district, unless they're looking really closely at the tax bill, they're none the wiser in terms of they're paying their full taxes. It's just where the taxes go. The bulk of the money, as the TIF gets older and it gets more valuable, the bulk of that money ends up into the TIF fund by the municipality. Illinois law allows a TIF district to exist for up to 23 years. You'll find that is the most common lifespan, but it doesn't have to be for 23 years. It could be for 10 or for 15. So we will talk about that as well. So this is like an idea I had on the way here. So this is different than the presentation you had on Friday, but I was trying to figure out a way to visually show what's happening. So this is just made up numbers really to show you what's happening when a TIF. So if you imagine a TIF lasting for 23 years, you have the frozen base. So this made up area has a certain value of EAV. And so the EAV is really what's taxed at the end of the day, the value. And that for the district, so like our district, for example, if this is one of our TIFs, that value is frozen for the 23 years. And then as the whole property gets more valuable, that extra area that's created, that's the increment. That's what we're talking about. So a tax increment financing district. That's the TIF that grows, the value that's increment beyond the frozen base. And then what happens at year 23, it shifts back over. So the TIF expires. And so instead of all the money, all the taxes that the taxpayers are paying going into the TIF, it then reverts and just goes back to the district. But it doesn't happen automatically. There's a legal step that the districts have to take. Each individual district has to take in order to allow that to happen. And so that's more what we're going to talk about. So that's broadly, any questions about this slide? Okay. I was really excited about this slide. All right. I won't go into all these details. You can read it at your pleasure, but the district has 4 TIFs, downtown Libertyville, which is expired, but that's probably primarily what we're talking about. Then we have a TIF in Green Oaks, and then we have 2 TIFs in Vernon Hills, one Melody Farms, and the other one is right across the street at Hawthorne. And so those all are 23-year TIFs, with the exception, as if you can do math, you'll notice that the Libertyville TIF was established in 1986 and expired 2021, and that is not 23 years later. That is more than 23 years later, and we will talk about that. Here's just a quick few slides over like the maps of the TIFs. So you can kind of see sometimes it's weird where the lines are drawn on TIFs, but this is the Libertyville TIF. So the downtown area there has been TIFed since the mid 80s. Melody Farms is there, including some of the roads that are connected to it. Hawthorne Mall, a good portion of Hawthorne Mall has been TIF, but there's parts of properties that are not part of the TIF that are part of the Hawthorne Mall. So that's important to watch for. And then Green Oaks, this is the TIF in Green Oaks. So this is down Rockland Road, like across the highway into that area. And so you can, again, it's kind of weird to see sometimes how some of these lines get drawn, but that's what the Green Oaks TIF looks like. All right. So that's more of a process and a little overview about TIFs in general. The next thing is like the economic conditions that we're in, right? So I told you about inflation. Well, we're at historic levels. Well, we're now even more at more historic levels, but back in December of 2021, we were at historic levels for CPI, and CPI was at 7%. That is the first time that CPI had been at that high since property tax cap was put into place, and that was in the early 90s. And so we've never had it that high, and that's important because that's something that's something we're fighting against in terms of like that's something we have to address in a lot of areas. But that also is important for property taxes because CPI is the single EAVs matter, but the single most important number that affects our levy is what is CPI. So that 7% being that high is massively significant. With that, another important law is the truth in taxation law. And so what that law says is that no less than 20 days before you adopt the levy, the board has to estimate the levy. And if we're estimating that the increase is going to be more than 5%, then you have to do a levy hearing. You can always do a hearing. You can do a hearing on anything you want. But if you're going to ask for more than 5% legally, you have to have this hearing. And with that hearing, you can't just have a hearing. You have to have a very specific notice published in the paper with very specific language, on a very specific time frame in a very specific part of the newspaper with very specific font. Like, it's very, very particular. And the intention is to make sure that people really know and see this is happening. So the law is meant to say, like, hey, this is significant and you need to pay attention. And so this will kick in. So you always have to comply with this law, but the compliance looks different. If you're asking for less than a 5% increase, hearing is not required. You can always do a hearing, but you don't have to. But if you're going to ask for more than 5% increase, you have to have a hearing by law. Okay, that is a brief look at the district. Some of the conditions we're talking about. Now we're ready to look at some data. So now we're going to pretend the TIF is not existing right now, and that's not part of this conversation, because just these numbers alone are significant. Are we ready to go? We're all right in there? Okay. So here's the estimates. So on the whole, this is a breakout of our district by EAV, by category. So the largest category that you find in most districts is going to be residential. And that's no different from us. One of the things that helps us be very strong and diverse, though, is the size of our commercial and industrial. That sometimes is the difference between a rich district and a not rich district, is what is the commercial industrial like? So if you did analysis like this about other schools, you probably will see a correlation between that. So what we have here is basically showing EAV is increasing in total. About existing EAV is about 3%, and then you have regular new property on top of that. So values going up on average.
Dan, can you just do a quick definition of EAV, just as a review?
Sure. EAV is the equalized assessed value. So so your house has a fair market value, right? Fair market value is what a willing seller and a willing buyer will agree to exchange property. So your fair market value, let's say your fair market value of your house is $300,000, for example. The assessed value is always 33.33% of that for residential. So if your home has a fair market value of 300,000, your assessed value would be 100,000. And then what happens is the state, so the Illinois Department of Revenue, will step in and look at the counties as a whole and try to get a balance of everything and get a sense, like, in their opinion, how accurate were the township assessors and the county assessors in doing their job, and they can apply a factor. So if they did a great job, the factor will be 1. So if your assessed value is 100,000 times 1 is 100,000. But sometimes it's not 100, it's not 1. So in Cook County, for example, it's always like 2 or 3% because they don't assess a lot of values at a third. They assess them at different levels. So it's a little tricky, but for our purposes, the equalization factor is almost always 1. Sometimes it's very close to 1. So that's really what we're talking about. It's the value of the taxable, it's the taxable values of the properties in your district. So there's things that you can't tax, like you can't tax houses of worship, some hospitals you can't tax, federal government property like these. We don't pay taxes on our high school, right? So nobody can tax, like the library can't tax our properties here. So it's the taxable values in your district.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So here's just a few slides showing some historical things. So this is just a tad fancy to show you that existing EAV is going up about 3%. And so we are on an upswing of increase in values relative to the last couple of years. So that's important because we were on a downswing and then we saw a little bit of recovery last year, and it's a bigger increase this year, a 3% increase in existing values. New property is up a little bit as well. That is the biggest change I can show you. Well, here, I'll break down new property. So what I do here is show you in the new property, how does that break out? So you can see residential always has a big chunk of it, right? That's people just making improvements to their homes. That's making additions, improving something that adds the value that the assessors recognize and put in. But what we've seen the last couple of years is a little bit of growth in commercial. And so that's just a few bigger things that are happening. And so what I usually like to do is highlight those things for you. So the first thing that is on there that is the most significant, and remember, this is equalized assessed value. So this is like a third of the actual fair market value. So like multiply that to make it bigger. I don't know if I'm going to say it right, the Everlay, Vernon Hills, those are the apartments like behind,
On the border.
on the border. There's some, it's 55 plus community there. That's what we're talking about. That's that if you drive by, you'll see it. That was on the books as of January 1st. The second was the Forester Hotel, and the Forester has been around for a little bit, but these values are always as of January 1st of a year. So what happened is the Forester wasn't done being built. So they had some of it built. So last year, part of the value of Forester was done, but then this year when it was totally complete, it added more value to it. Impact Networking is off of 94. If you ever drive north a little bit, you'll see they built another building. So that's Impact Networking. And then Advocate Medical Family Group Practice, that is right across the street from Condell. That's been built up for a while now, and I think they've finally finished that. And so that value is incorporated there. So those are really the bigger commercial things that are coming on. And even I guess I should say I'm pretty sure the living place is considered commercial versus residential, but I may be wrong. But anyways, that's one of the highest new property increases. It may not be classed as residential, I just realized, but it's significant. Okay. All right. So that's in terms of what's happening in the value. So the takeaway from that is I would say existing values going up 3% and new property a bit higher than we normally do. All right. Those are important data points in terms of calculating this stuff. So now for the actual levy and extension data. So we're projecting the levy to go up. Now, this is really to show that it hasn't always gone up. Once we paid off all of our debt back in the 2015, 2016 time, you can see it's a pretty steady increase there. This is a reminder that the district has no debt, and this is definitely an advantage in some respects to owners that live here. We get comparisons all the time to other districts, and if you look at other districts, they have debt, but we don't. So that's something that property owners are not paying for debt. And so we've been debt free for several years. This is a slide that I try to show the correlation between CPI and what I'm calling our tax cap extension. So typically what you find is we are very, very close to CPI, but we always end up getting a little bit more than CPI. I'm going to put you on the spot. Anybody know why?
New property.
New property. So the values that were there are taxed at CPI, and then new properties that were built that didn't exist before are added on top. So that's why you will see historically there's CPI plus a bit added on top. What you'll notice for 2022 is the opposite happening. And that opposite is, so CPI is 7, but we are going to be capped at a little more than 5. And the reason is the law caps us at 5% increase. So you get the lesser of CPI or 5%, whichever's less. No one really ever cared about that the lesser of before, because CPI was never close to 5. So who cares? Well, we care now because it's gonna limit it. So the law is really doing what's intended effect is to limit the increase of property taxes. The other thing is just a reminder. So if you go back to see this little red line going down in 2014, that was a decision made at that time to lower the levy. And so that lowering, due to the way the laws work, has a kind of lasting impact. And so this is a reminder that there was tax relief done in 2014 that continues in effect to this day. So essentially what I'm saying is our property taxes are getting close to about $1.5 million less than they would have been otherwise had that action not been taken in 2014. And to show you can make a decision 1 year that has a long lasting impact. And so these are significant decisions every year that are not just 1 year decisions. These are forever decisions that you actually have to make each year.
Dan, do you mind
Yep.
talking a little bit about the law that makes it so that the decision that we made in 2014 affected subsequent years.
Yeah, so in general, there's always a general rule and then there's exceptions. The general rule is you can get whatever you got last year adjusted for inflation. So if in one year you decided to take less money, the next year that's your new base that you start from, because it's always what you did last year. Now, the actual rules, it'll do a 3-year look back and you can get the highest of those 3, but you still lose on it that 1 year. So the idea is if you leave money on the table once, you essentially lose it forever. But there was a recent law put in place that allowed, and that's been something that's been driving me nuts, because I would love to be able to say like, hey, there's an extra $1 million this year. We don't really need it, but we're going to need it in a couple of years to allow us to have that flexibility. But the law has not really allowed us to have that flexibility. There was a law passed last year-ish that allowed for some of that flexibility, but not when CPI is this high, because it's way more tricky. So that's not something that's really accessible to us for right now. That's something that we could look at in a couple of years, I think. But for right now, with our economic conditions, it's not something I think is viable for us. So now here's the algebra, right? We know what the CPI is. It's 7, but it's capped at 5. We know last year's extension, the existing EAV, new property. And so we run that into blah, 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 5.64% increase. Now this, so forget the TIF. What we're saying is just on this year's own merit. So this is what most other districts are dealing with, is just this part. And then we have the TIF, but go to like Hawthorne, for example, like they're just dealing with this data. You're at 5, you're more than 5% right now on your levy. So this is going to require truth in taxation to kick in. Now, existing owners, we're going to be at the 5% because the new property adds it a little bit more. Now, this is tricky because this gets confusing. So are you saying that my taxes are going to go up 5%? I'm saying maybe. It depends on how your value changes relative to the whole group. So for example, if the entire district is going up 3% and your individual property value goes up 3%, then your taxes will go up 5%. If you were already here last year. If your value goes up by less than 3%, say your value only goes up 1% on your individual house, then your taxes will go up by less than 5%. I couldn't tell you how much, but mathematically it would be less than 5%. If your values go up, say something weird happened in your neighborhood and your value goes up 5%, your taxes will go up by more than 5% because you're that much higher than the average. So it's always relative to the average. So I've been talking about this for years because like, that's just the way the math has to work, but I've never really like fleshed that out more for you. So I decided to get on a tangent here. And I spent probably a little too much time trying to find a property that really showed this as a good example. And the reason why it was a good example is because the change in value was close to the average change. So this is last year's data. So let me give you an example. So this is a real, I could show you the PIN number and everything, but I'm not going to do that because that's somebody's house. This is a real property in our district. I'll just tell you it's in Vernon Hills. That's as more specific as I'll get. So to give you an example, the CPI that we were dealing with last year was 1.4, and the existing change in EAV was down a 0.6%, so 0.6%, so almost flat, just down a little bit. I found this property in our district, and when I compared the values, I found that they were down 0.3%. That's very, very, very close. A lot of properties were up 3%, which is not a really helpful demonstration of this, or they were down 1.5%, which again is not very helpful. But this was very close to the 0.06 decrease that the whole district experienced. So for that house, their property taxes were $93.65 in 2021. And their 2020 taxes were $92.20. So their value did go down a bit, but their taxes went up. But if I did that, when I did the math here, that was a 1.6% change in their taxes. So did they have exactly 1.4? No, but they were really close. But the reason why theirs was a little bit more is because they didn't go down as much as everything else went down. Does that make sense? So it's always relative to the whole. So for an individual taxpayer, what I'm saying is, if your value goes up by 3%. So you should all have your, what are the blue sheets? I don't know what color, I don't live here. Your taxes are too high. But if you all have your blue sheets, if your assessed value went up by 3%, then you'd be looking at 5%. And the best answer I can give you is it's 5% when inflation is 7 and 8 that we're dealing with. So at least this is doing what the law intended. The law was intended to cap extensions and to protect the homeowner from inflation, like what we're having right now. So any questions on normal data? We're getting the TIF. All right, bear with me. We're in the home stretch. The Libertyville TIF is expiring, has expired, and this is very significant. So this was established in 1986. It was originally to expire in 2009. But then at that time, it was extended another 12 years to December 31st, 2021. But part of that extension agreement was for that period of extension. So for those 12 years, the other taxing districts would get 70% of the TIF increment that was received that year. So the property taxes that the TIF brought in, they wrote a check to all the different districts for 70% of that. For our district, for example, the check we got last year was $1 million. And we're gonna get another one because it expired December 1st of 2021. So it was taxable for 2021. And y'all just finished paying your final taxes of 2021. So once the books settle, we will get another check this spring for that. But after that, that $1 million check goes away. And so that's why it's more important for me to share, like, if you do nothing, you will be net down $1 million. And that's not something we can absorb. So the way it legally happens, the way it really transfers from the TIF back to all the different districts is it comes on for us as new property. It legally, it's pretending it never existed before and now it's brand new. And so you have to capture it just like new property. So that's why if you remember for the first slide, I showed new property like skyrocketing way up. That's exactly what's happening that's how the formula works. So if you remember this one, right, this was a general picture for how TIFs work, right? The increment goes. So then what I did, I went a step further and made a fancier one that is trying to illustrate again what's actually more happening with the Libertyville TIF. So you have the left side, which was that same chart that I showed you, and that's what happened for the first 23 years. And then once the extension was decided, this district still had access to that frozen base for the other 12 years. But what happened is 70% of that increment of that blue was then taken up because they sent us a check. So they got the money, but they turned right around and would send us a check for it essentially. So really the TIF has only really had access to 30% net of the TIF money for them for the last 12 years. So that's just another way of trying to look at it and visualize. This is what's been happening with the TIF. This is why, like, this is not a normal TIF. Like, normal TIFs happen this way, which is already complicated enough. Like, this is even more complicated, which is why, like, I've been a little anxious for like how to explain this, because it is complex, but it is very important.
Dan?
Yes.
Piece that would be considered new property is the entire tax increment, including the surplus, whatever, but not the frozen base.
Yes, the frozen base is not new property. It's only that increment that still exists. But we in effect are getting the value because they're sending us a check.
Right.
But yeah, it's really the increment. So I don't have to consider the entire value as new property, only that increment that grew back from 1986, which back then, let's just say it wasn't terribly valuable back in 1986, and it has grown in value quite substantially. And this is relatively close to the numbers. Like, it started at 11 million of value, and now we're up to the increment itself is like 57, 58 million. So the net of that is, 70 some million. So it's up there for sure. So this is not exactly to scale, but it's pretty close to what was actually happening with that. Okay, so here's another, I'm trying to show you multiple ways to try to illustrate what's happening. So the revenue, from the Libertyville TIF versus the levy. So what's been happening for us is from the increment. So I'm just talking about that upper triangle, the increment, we've been getting our 70% check. But what will happen is starting next fiscal year, because of the way we account for property taxes, we will jump to the full value of the TIF. So that's going That's going to that orange way over there. So that's essentially what's showing happening, and that would continue going forward. Another view is for the owners that live there, what has it been like? So let's just say how much of their dollars has gone to the TIF versus the district. The blue part would be an estimate for what would have gone to the TIF versus what went straight to the district just in terms of property tax bills. And then the TIF expires, and then now instead of the money going to the TIF, the money then goes to the district. So is it an increase of taxes for the district? Yes. But it's also a decrease of money going to the TIF because that goes down to zero. And I got a illustration that I think will help make that more clear. So when you think about the 70% TIF that we've been getting for the last 12 years, the net effect of what we've really been receiving is our portion of the TIF plus that 70% money. So really, in essence, we've been getting 70% of that TIF for the last several years. And now the idea is it's really that little bit difference that's going to shift it up. Yes.
Is it correct to say that this represents TIF expiring represents an increase of revenue to the district, but not a net increase to taxpayers?
Yes. Yeah. And I will show you what I mean. Great timing. So this was my attempt to try to illustrate and show you what's really happening. So this is part of the Libertyville TIF. These are houses that are literally across the street from each other. It's not anybody you know, but they are across the street from each other, and they're very similar. So if you look at the total taxes at the bottom, 21,000 versus 20,500, they're very, 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 very close in value. But one of them is in the TIF, one of them is not in the TIF. The one that is in the TIF, what's important to see is look at the amount of money that is going to the district in the TIF. $303 for the normal, and then the pension. I don't know why they split out the pension, but just you have to combine them together. So call it $311 has been going to the district. And if you look past, you'll see those rates have been similar for a long time. And if you see how much of their $21,000 tax bill goes to the TIF. Can you see that number? $20,000 of the $21,000 bill goes to the TIF. That's the increment that has been happening for the last 35 years. All right. So essentially what will happen is their taxes wouldn't go down. It would shift to everybody else. So essentially, then go to the district or the house that's right across the street that is not in the TIF. Their taxes for the district have been, $6,800. And it's been probably close to that kind of steadily going. What's going to happen is that TIF part of their bill is going to go away, and all these other ones are just going to go up. So for that owner, the year-to-year total should be mathematically based on their assessment, assuming their assessment goes up by 3%, CPI, 5% increase. But what has to happen is each individual taxing district has to levy for that money. So I couldn't tell you what all those other districts do, but I'm guessing they all will. And if they all do, then really the house, they will start to look extremely similar this time next year. Does that make sense? So so does their portion that goes to District 128 go up dramatically? Yes. But are the total taxes they're paying going to go up dramatically? No. And does this TIF expiring affect people that don't live in the TIF? No. But is it more money for us in property taxes? Yes. So this is very complex and tricky, and it can quickly get scary if people don't understand what's really happening. Because what's really happening is this could sound to people like an 8% increase in taxes. What I'm trying to say is it will look like that, but that's not really what's happening. What's really happening is a 5% increase on taxes for existing owners and a shift from the TIF back to District 128.
And Dan, based on these examples, for the last 12 years, the district has been getting the lion's share of that 20,000. Well, not this district, but the taxing districts have been getting the lion's share of that $20,000 for the last 12 years. Right?
We've been getting a 70% check from the village, but it's not like when we get it, it's not taxes to us. It's a surplus from the TIF. So it's taxes to the village and to that TIF district. But it's not been in the form of property taxes. So it's not going to show up on the tax bill, for example.
Right.
You know,
But we've been working on it for the last 12 years, expecting the surplus from the TIF to come to us. And we've been working with
Yes.
that money for the last 12 years. So this isn't a big change to the individual taxpayer.
yes, because what will happen is our taxes the taxes that we get from those properties go up, but then that TIF check goes down to zero.
Right.
Right, so that is, it's just an exchange, and there's a bit more value. It's really the 30% of the TIF is the additional one we're talking about, which is about $500,000 at the end of the day. So it will be more money for the district net wise, but that's just because of the shift. So normally in normal TIFs, you've been getting 0% of the increment and then you shift to getting 100. We're essentially going to be shifting from getting 70% of it up to 100 now.
Yeah, because when you look at this for the last 20 some years, for many years, we've been getting none of, with the exception of the 70%, but early on, we got none of the incremental tax revenue.
Yeah, so
We
if I-
were, getting back to your very, very early conversation about the long-term impact of a reduction or a stagnation in that tax revenue. We've been experiencing that for those properties for that period of time.
Yeah, the best example I can show you is our Melody Farms TIF. So the taxable value for us was 290,000 back in 2021. Or that was the value back in 2017, but it stayed frozen at 290,000. The increment value is 43 million. So that 43 million, so when you go to Lazy Dog, that's great. It doesn't really do anything to help the district right now. That whatever you're doing there helps offset the cost of the development of Melody Farms. And so we won't reap the benefits of that for another 20 years. That's an illustration of really what you're talking about.
And we would never reap the benefits unless at that point in time, we levy for that amount
Mhm.
that comes off the TIF.
Yes. So pitching me back up here, we're almost done. So now here's the data, because I'm trying to show you, like, forget the TIF for a second. This is significant. Now, when I add the TIF in, you're going to see how much more significant some of these numbers are changing. So the EAV still goes up, not as much. It's not like our EAV doubles, right? So 58 million is a lot of EAV, but you have to remember our EAV is like close to 3 billion, right? So perspective here, it's valuable and it's important, but it's not a huge movement, right? The existing values don't change because that's existing. This comes in as new property. Here's the real one. So this is what I told you a year ago was going to kind of happen. The real one is a little bit higher because our new property this year was a little bit higher than I thought it would be. So you're talking 80 million, close to 80 million of new property, which the vast majority of that is in capturing the TIF. So then new property by class jumps up crazy again because of the TIF. So now our levy and extension data, taxes go up, and that is a bigger increase. So now you see relative to CPI, we are now going to be higher than the 7% CPI. But that's because the TIF is coming back on. So it is more tax dollars for us. But what this can't show, because it's not taxes, it wasn't taxes for us, this doesn't show us losing the 70% check, right? But our whole financial picture shows that. So when we walk through financial projections, I showed that the accounting for that. So we have to account for that in our system. It's not going to show up when you look at just property taxes. That's one section of more sources of income that we have. But again, it's really the relative change in value is a little bit more than CPI, but really the only reason for that is for this TIF. Most other districts are going to be closer to the 5%. We are in a unique position that compounds this. Meaning, in other words, it'd be much more helpful if the TIF happened last year, because then it wouldn't be such of a dramatic increase. But now when I plug in the new data that includes the TIF, now you're talking about a 7.5% increase in taxes for the district. This is tax revenue for the district. But that does not mean that taxpayers that live here are going to pay 7.5% more. What this means is for existing owners, this is still true. Existing owners will increase on average 5%, which is the CPI cap relative to their change. So if you're an existing owner, you don't live in the TIF, your taxes for District 128 will go up. If you go up 3%, they would go up 5%. Now, if you live in the TIF, your taxes for D128 go way high. But your TIF, the taxes that go to the TIF go way down, right? So the people in the TIF, their taxes to District 128 will definitely go up, but their net tax burden, their net tax bill will not go up anywhere near that amount. It'll, again, will be very close to the 5% relative to their individual change in assessment. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So with all of that, here is the actual estimate levy that I'm proposing for you. So this is taking into account all the calculations, the seven, I tried to bold the real numbers to look at here, but all the individual numbers are there. But essentially, what my estimate I think we're going to be at 7.5. But what I'm saying is for us to request 7.8, which gives us the $300,000 cushion. The $300,000 cushion has been what we've been using for a number of years, because the reality is remembering that formula with 4 variables, 2 we know, 2 we do not. This accounts for what happens if those numbers are wrong. And we don't want to accident. I don't want it to be an accident if they're wrong, is essentially my point. So, so the $300,000 cushion would be similar to what we've been doing for the last several years. So we figure out what is our estimate, and we add a little bit of a cushion on top of that. Either way, you're still faced with the truth and taxation hearing as required by law. So the difference between 7.5 and 7.8 at the end of the day isn't really much. We know we're going to be closer to 7.5. So then what I did is I ran like 2 scenarios, like what happens if those 2 variables are wrong? And really the point is, you know how I said existing EAV went up 3%? So if existing EAV was actually flat instead of up 3, and if say new property was actually 88 million and not 80 million, we would lose about $1,000. So, and that, like, for it to be that wrong would be really significant. I don't think that's likely. And another scenario, like Larry, let's say instead of EAV being 3%, it's 1.5%. But again, new property is even higher. Like we forgot about something really expensive that got built that we somehow missed. We would be out maybe 20 grand. But I think those are extremely unlikely to happen. Are they possible? Yes. Are they likely? No. You won't know for sure until too late when you've already had to make this decision by the end of December. So just as a reminder, this has not been unknown information to us. We have known about this for years, and we've been trying to plan and respond to accordingly. So I just want to give you, when we met in February and we ran through our financial projections, these were the assumptions that were used on those projections. That CPI in 2022, because we knew it at that point, was going to be CPI. So let me say it again. The 5% CPI was assumed in our February projections. Additionally, new property was assumed. The giant jump in new property from the TIF was also assumed in that. It wasn't quite as high. It's closer to 80 million, but we knew it was going to be significant. And though with those 2 really important assumptions, these were our projections at that time. So, and this is with the change in accounting, right? So this is showing really what we thought was going to happen. And so this is where, when I always refer back and say, we knew that this year was going to be a deficit. So we're in fiscal year 23 right now. That's our fiscal year. We knew it was going to be a deficit, but all signs pointed to that this is a 1-year thing. This is what I mean when it's a 1-year thing. And that after that, we should be okay. Like these numbers are close. And yeah, 5 years from now, it does go negative, but that's really close. Like these, we're talking like $100 million, like being off by 100,000 is so immaterial. Like I'm not worried about any of that. Like we have time to adjust for those. But even this is very close. This is probably even a tad closer than I would probably normally feel comfortable with, but I'm just showing you the importance of that data, that assumption in our financial projections. So if I reran these and say we didn't do this, our projections will look vastly different. And they're not even exactly true now, because now we have negotiations are done. We know all those things. Like there's a lot more data that we know now. And that's why projections are only as good as the day you print them. And the next day you get better information and you know more better information for the future. So all that to say, like, we knew this was coming. I've tried to prepare you as we've been closer in the years. Those who've been here longer, hopefully you've been more familiar, but if those of you new who, this should not be the first time you're hearing about this, so that so that you feel prepared. So what are the next steps? We can review this. If you have any questions tonight, we will have 3 more opportunities to talk about this. One of the things I'm going to ask that is going to look a little bit different than what we've done before is I'm going to ask you to approve an estimate levy at our October meeting. This is not a final levy. What this is this is the strongest, evidence that I can show that the board estimated the levy for the truth and taxation purposes. To show it clearly in our minutes, this is what we think the estimate is. So we can point in, it's clearly 20 days. We clearly saw, here's the action, here's everything to be very clear and transparent. Like we estimated this 20 days before the final adoption. And this is what we're estimating. Then what would happen is we would have scheduled on November 14th, the levy hearing, which would also be the same night later on that you could approve the levy. And the truth and taxation notice in the paper probably would be on November 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. It's very, very peculiar, this notice. So what I have here is essentially a draft of what that notice is. Like the law prescribes literally the words to use, and that gives you blanks to fill in these specific things. Like it wants somebody's name, it wants their address, and it wants their phone number. Their name, title, address, phone number. And it's very clear at the end of this, like if you add extra words into this, it's not legally enforceable. So I can't add more explanation, right? I can't say, yeah, it's 7.8, but really if you're existing here, it's only going to be really 5. I can't say that. Legally, you're not allowed to. You have to say what the law says you can say in the notice of the paper. And so these are all the rules for the hearing notice. I don't think you have to worry about it other than that, like, this is a very serious notice that we are going to take seriously and make sure that it's done appropriately with the timing. So even the timing, like it has to be no less than 7 days before the hearing and no more than 14 days before. Like it has to be that, like the second week before, very particular timing of the notice. That's all I have for you. So I guess I would go back.
Go ahead. Just to be clear, the hearing and the adoption on the levy will take place in a committee meeting. Correct?
No, the November 14th is the board meeting.
Is that the regular board meeting?
I believe that's the regular board meeting.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
then on future agenda items, we just need to. Well, yeah, okay, it does say that. All right, sorry.
Mhm.
Moving on. Go ahead, Lisa. I'm sorry, you had a question.
So after this notice appears at the beginning of November, the hearing will take place on November 14th. At which time, I'm assuming a presentation very similar to this one will be given.
I would pare it down probably because I probably wouldn't be quite as thorough as this. I would probably stick with a abbreviated version of this.
And if somebody wanted the more expanded version, they would be able to refer to the recording of this meeting, which will be posted on our website subsequent to tonight. So there'll be more than one opportunity for someone to hear your in-depth explanation of how we arrived at these numbers, even though the notice in the newspaper cannot be modified to include any explanation.
And the 24th, we'll also have some kind of an explanation during that board meeting.
But the abbreviated version, so I was
Right,
saying
right.
two versions tonight.
yeah.
And the 24th.
Yeah, multiple opportunities. Yeah.
But I'm anticipating that after the notice appears in the paper, the levy hearing will be the third opportunity. Again, abbreviated, but another opportunity for an explanation. So there'll be tonight, the October 24th board meeting and the levy hearing. So that's 3 explanations.
One additional, the facilities and finance on the 7th. So after the notice in the paper, we'll have a committee meeting too in between. So
That's
there'll
right.
be another opportunity then.
That's right.
October board meeting, November committee meeting, November board meeting.
Hearing and board meeting. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's three more opportunities in addition tonight
Yes.
for community members to have the opportunity to hear the explanation of how we arrived at those numbers
And
And the-
provide comment.
and provide comment.
Right.
Very important. Yes.
And the October board meeting will be what you will also present at the November adoption public hearing. Okay. So if we
Yeah, it
have.
may not like, again, it may not be exactly the same, but it's gonna be the same numbers.
Yeah.
Just the whether or not like how much of this is gonna be too overwhelming, you
Right.
know, we're trying to find that balance of properly informed but not overwhelmed.
Right, it'll be an opportunity for us to say, I'd like to hear more about this at the adoption hearing, or maybe we could pare this down. So that's really what I was getting at, is it'll be another opportunity for us to refine what is said to the public, and another opportunity for the public to hear the information that's important behind this number that they're going to see.
Deadline for the levy adoption is,
By law, it has to be filed with the county clerk by the last Tuesday in December. I always encourage us to approve it in November. Because if we banked on December and something happened and you could not have a quorum in December, there's no extension. Like, December is our extension in case something bad happens. Like, and I've had that before. Like, my previous district, we had a November meeting that we were supposed to adopt it, and we just couldn't get a quorum. Like, we just had board members, one family emergency or traveling or whatever. We could not get 4 at our regular meeting. We couldn't hold our regular meeting. So very thankful we had December where we could adopt the final levy. So with something of this kind of significance, I want as much protections around it as much as we can, enough time so that or contingency time for things to happen. So
We appreciate the fail-safe option. Thank you. It's important. Any other questions, comments? There will be other opportunities, like we said.
I appreciate the, it's a lot of thought that goes into trying to present what can be very easily a misunderstood process. And I think it's important for us, and it's our obligation from a financial perspective for the district to maximize and not, lose revenue that we would have typically been getting all along, and not lose that because the perception may be incorrect. So I appreciate that's a lot of work and a lot of thought.
Yes, you were adding data, adding tables to help us understand. And I never get tired of the granular detail that you provide to us. I can't hear these things enough. I also don't take for granted that we have someone as skilled as you at the nitty-gritty of doing your job, but also being able to explain it to a layperson such as myself. So I'm very grateful for your expertise, and thank you for going into this level of detail. I'm always very happy to hear it. I can't hear it enough. I'm happy that I hear it every year. Thank you for the effort that it takes for you to explain it over and over and over.
I'll make one more quick comment. I was on the board at 2014 when that decision was made, and I would not want to repeat that this year. I'll just leave it at that.
And I would encourage members of the public to attend either the October board meeting, the November board meeting, where we're adopting it, ask questions. This is a process that's meant to be in front of the public, and the opportunity for the public to ask questions. So.
And this is why there are so
Yeah.
many guardrails around the laws concerning this. And it's my hope that we have as many people paying attention to this as we have had for other issues.
Yeah. Yeah, it is one of the single most important things we do as a board, and we take it very seriously. So thank you, Dan, for the time you put into that. Are we ready to move on? Okay, moving on to the fiscal year 23 state maintenance project grant.
Yeah, so these normally don't come around every year, so it's a little weird that this came up again this year. But the state maintenance project grant was opened for this year. It's very similar to prior years where it's a $50,000 matching grant from the state. So essentially means you need to do a project that's at least $100,000. Then you pay for it, the state will give you 50 grand. Or honestly, the way that it's been working is you tell them you're going to do the project and then they just send you the 50 grand. So that's great. but we have to identify a project and have this approved by the board and filed in November. And so we don't know, like, just full transparency, like we're working on this. We don't know the exact project right now. But we will have more information for you at the next meeting to identify this, that there's a little bit more processing time to look for board approval in November. And then the next day we'll file it with the state or with the regional office. So it's in the categories of you'll see somewhat similarities. The state ranks these in prioritization: emergency projects, health, life safety projects, state priority projects, which, man, I don't remember, I said it, but I can't remember now. One of it is something educational related. I can't remember what the right was, sorry, off the top of my head. And the other one was sustainability efforts. There's two really state priorities that they listed. And then the fourth one is permanent improvement projects. And so the reality is everybody that applies gets the money. That's never been an issue. What will happen is there are some districts that struggle to have the 50,000 to be able to contribute. And so they don't apply. So stay tuned.
We're fortunate to be able to do that, and I am sure you will come to us with a project that is worth the time and effort. And hey, the opportunity to get some state support behind this and not have it hit our budget fully is excellent.
Yeah, and it has to be a project that is not already board approved. Like, it can't be a project you're already doing. So like you have to have a new project, which once we have this prioritized list, it would be very helpful to say like, oh, this is the next one. This would be a perfect example of that working out for us to say, this is the next one.
In the aging assets that are our buildings that we do a lot to take care of, we have no shortage of projects that I'm sure we can find something to do with it.
I will look forward to hearing that at the November board meeting. Hearing about it at the committee meeting and voting on it at the November, which will be a week later.
Okay, and then we've got a little list of some future agenda items. Once again, the most important being the additional opportunities to hear about the tax levy and the adoption process. I think I'll go the route that Jim did and not read all of them. So any questions or comments? No? Good. All right, well, this adjourns facilities and finance at 7:45.